Welcome back to the Dossier Project, everyone. And we're very happy to be back here with you. We have read some of Andrew Tate's letter, and we thought it was pretty appropriate to share some of our thoughts in relationship to his letter, because a big part of what we were doing in DOS and a big part of the intention of DOS was to help women be able to find their way out of prison, essentially. How do we become aware of our own internal prisons and face our fears so that we can be more free to be ourselves, to find ourselves, and to be able to uphold our values and express ourselves in the world without the fear of these other external circumstances that are imposed upon us, supposedly. So we bring that to you today. I think you guys, many of you may be familiar with his statement, but if not, go ahead and take a look at that. In addition to his letter and his statement, we also have been quite inspired by someone Michelle has introduced us to, who is Assata Shakur. I don't know if you guys have heard of her, but she's pretty badass. And one of the quotes that she has in her book says, "People get used to anything. The less you think about your oppression, the more your tolerance grows for it. After a while, people just think oppression is the normal state of things. But to become free, you have to be acutely aware of being a slave." So I love this statement. It reminds me of the book 1984, of the Truman Show. I don't think this is an obscure concept. I think people have been talking about this for a very long time. And I think in a lot of ways, it helps make DOS and what we were doing in DOS relevant to the conversation. So yeah, Michelle, I don't know if you have any more thoughts on Assata Shakur that you want to share as well.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, I think people should go and research her, but she, if you ask a lot of Black men what their favorite book is, they'll say the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I think of Assata Shakur as my fiance is like saying, me too. He's not a Black man, but he got that spurt, but I think a lot of time I see her autobiography as kind of like the female counterpart to that. She was a Black Panther, and she was wrongly accused of killing a police officer on the the New Jersey Turnpike. And she was shot, and she ended up escaping prison. And she has been on the on the FBI's most wanted list since then. She ended up escaping prison, and she's been living in exile in Cuba since then. So she wrote this incredible autobiography that actually Nikki and I read together back a few years ago. And I think it helped us process just what it means to be in a fight for freedom. And it's so interesting because, there's like all the songs from like the civil rights movement, freedom, and it's like you can sing about freedom and it can feel really nice, but like, I think when you really commit yourself to a path of internal freedom, from the outside, it can be very unrecognizable and it can be seen as a threat. And I think figures in history who have really committed themselves to freedom, like an Assata Shakur, get to a point where they recognize they are not living for this physical world. They recognize that it's also the way they're choosing to live is not accepted by the physical world. And I have now personally experienced that as well, and I knew for me, being a part of DOS was like the next pathway for me to build real freedom, which means I don't need anything or anyone, anything in the material world to be okay, to just do my life, to have permission to live how I want to live. And that was really important to me. And that is not an easy path. And her book has really helped me. And this quote is beautiful. And it's like the things that we speak, that we've talked about in our videos for years. I know a lot of people like to think it's just because, we're doing peace bidding and we're brainwashing all of that. But it's like, if you look at the ancient texts, if you look at other freedom fighters, you drop out the context and the walk is the same. The principles are the same. The path is the same. What you're willing to take is the same. So I've really drawn a lot of strength from her over these, and I read her book well before I ever took an ESP course. And her words have only become more relevant to me. So I'm grateful to bring this to the space. And I really encourage everyone here, of course, like we should definitely do a book club to read her book because she's very powerful and she's still around. I hope to meet her one day.
That would be incredible. Oh my God, guest appearance. Amazing. Yeah, what else? What do you ladies think? Do you guys relate to this? And does it relate to your experience in DOS, or what are your ladies' thoughts?
Yeah, I could say a lot.
Oh, Leah, you
Yeah,
remuted. There you go.
One thing I was thinking about the end of that quote, where it talks about being acutely aware you're a slave, that would be very uncomfortable. Like, think about it. But that is, like, when you think about freedom, that is what it would cost. It costs a certain amount of pain, discomfort, uncertainty. Like I just came from swimming, and like when you're in the water and you have freedom, it's a little bit discombobulating too, at least at first. So I was thinking about I like that the quote touches on the trials you have to go through, to get to a place of freedom, and being aware of the things that impinge upon your freedom, and that's uncomfortable to face those constraints or the oppression, as she says. So yeah, I like the quote. There's a lot we could unpack there.
Yeah, the rage, right? I mean, Andrew Tate says, you have to then experience the anger. You have to experience the frustration of being enslaved. But unless you feel that pain and that frustration, you will not have the motivation to free yourself. Complicit. So sorry, Sahaja. So you're getting ready to go.
I don't know. I forgot it now. I was listening to you. I mean, I think though, yeah, like both I don't know so much about Andrew Tate, but I briefly read his letter. I think based on his release from prison right now, right? It was the letter or the statement. And it made me think a lot of, other people in history that have, gone up against great adversity. I was thinking particularly about Nelson Mandela, who spent decades in prison, and, who through his words, he said that he felt an immense amount of freedom in there because he knew that he was standing for what was right. And, even though you're in a prison cell, it's about your emotional state, your perception. And, I do think that most of us are enslaved in so many ways that we're not aware of, whether it is to the idea that we need to have a certain position or certain relationships, or like anywhere where we feel like there's a downside. If we don't have it, we're enslaved. Where we feel like we need to do it, we're compelled to do it, we're enslaved. And it's anything from having a coffee in the morning. If you feel like you have to have a coffee in the morning to operate, you've now become enslaved to the coffee, and I think it's very human, but it's also very powerful to start looking at where we are enslaved in our lives so that we can have more freedom and aren't as dependent on other people, circumstances, external things, so that, no matter what's going on, you still feel clear on who you are and what you're doing and why you're doing it. And it's not just a compulsion.
I'll just add.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you.
I was just saying, like, when you just say, like, I just focusing on freedom, right? And what does that mean? And I think people confuse the freedom that, freedom to do what you want, and the internal freedom, as he says, where no matter what goes on in the external world, you are free in your spirit and your thoughts and how you react and so forth. And that's, I think, really the important freedom. Like, it reminds me of Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning, right? Where, I mean, think about probably the most horrific situation ever, right? Being in prison and Holocaust, losing all your loved ones. And yet he found the freedom and the will to live. And it's one of my favorite quotes is, with a strong enough why, you can overcome anyhow. I think that's a paraphrase from him.
It's actually Thich Nhat Hanh.
It's what?
He quotes it in Man's Search for Meaning, but it's often misquoted by him, but he was quoting Thich Nhat Hanh.
Oh, okay. So, and I don't think that that was an exact quote even of what I say, because it's, I think, slightly different, but the way I remember it with a strong enough why you can overcome anyhow, and maybe original kudos, to Fitch Non Han. I've never heard that. Okay. All right. I guess Viktor Frankl had better marketing because we attribute it to him. But anyway, and I think that's important to be able to draw those distinctions in our world. It doesn't mean you go out and do whatever you want, just feeling like, yelling out things and just letting emotional, I would say, explosions go all over the place, and if anything like slightly upsets you, then you unleash the Kraken, which I've been guilty of, versus having that constraint and that emotional strength to be able to be that kind of strong oak, with deep roots, to be able to withstand, anything that's going around, and have the flexibility to not be so rigid in terms of what is that you break. But like, I have this image of like a strong oak, deep roots, but then the top is almost like willow, can bend and flow and flex. So I think that's, to me, kind of what that comes up for me. So I find that helpful to navigate when things don't go out as you plan. And that's life, because life is unexpected, because we're dealing with people, and people do the darndest things.
I love that metaphor, Linda. I just want to correct myself because I looked that quote up. I wanted to get it correct. It's actually Friedrich Nietzsche.
Oh, Nietzsche, I've heard. Yes.
Nietzsche,
I've heard.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
German,
I stand corrected. We'll put it in the video notes.
Yeah.
Well, they're all pretty amazing people, all of the ones you have quoted. So
we hang with the good folks,
I just wanted to add, I think this is a beautiful conversation, and it's a long one, but I do, when you were talking, Linda, I was just thinking about, myself, and parenting is one of the hardest things that I've ever embarked on. And, just being exactly that, like that, oak and roots deep, because life doesn't go the way you plan. And, sometimes it's just, kids being kids, and you're not in the mood, but it's your mood, right? It's your emotions. And then sometimes, someone is ill and someone goes into the hospital, and it's like really deep emotions that are moving. And I really feel like I felt the freedom, for me, just in acknowledging that what's happening outside is not what I would like. I never want to see my child, hurt or in pain by any means, right? Like, nobody wants that. Nobody wants someone they care sick. And for me, being able to just be there and withstanding the situation, as much compassion for ourselves and as much love for our people, and at the same time just recognizing that it is our choice to be however we want to be in those situations. And I do think that is freedom, like however we want to react, that we want to react a certain way, not because it's like, oh, things are blowing my way, so I react. That's not freedom. That's actually being a slave to the situation. So thank you for that vision. That's a really beautiful one.
Well, Angie, as you said that, I think the moments we don't feel free is when we feel like we don't have choice or options, right? Like we have to now do this thing, or be there, or go there, or do whatever it is. That's, the feeling of not being free. But we don't realize how in any given moment, in any given situation, there are like multiple options, that you can choose from. Like if you're not unhappy about a relationship, about a situation, about anything, you have hundreds of things you can do with it, how you react, what you do, what you don't do. And I don't think we realize that. And if we did see that more and we're more aware of those options, I think we would feel a lot freer. Which is, what I think we've been talking about, is taking responsibility, seeing your options, and then owning them full-heartedly, and knowing why you're doing what you're doing and why that's important to you.
Yes. Well, as Angie said, this is a very long conversation, and I think that we can continue to have it. I'm super excited, honestly, to bring this topic to the Dossier project, because I think it really presents a very important filter for people who actually want to understand what DOS was about. If you are really questioning, if you really do want to try to understand better, it's almost impossible to understand it without this filter, you know. And I think if you guys really want to understand it, look through this filter of where you find yourself restrained, where you feel like you don't have choice, where you feel like a slave in your own life, or to this person's reaction or this thing or this circumstance. And if you do that, you may understand better the supposed reasons we chose to take on dietary restrictions or do certain practices or have certain practices, and then they may make a little bit more sense to you. So definitely want to hear your questions, definitely want to hear your responses. Let us know what you guys think, and we will see you next week.
Oh, and-
Just
and
really quick.
subscribe.
Oh, and subscribe, of course.
Yes.
Subscribe. This is our new YouTube channel. Please, please subscribe. See, these girls have my back every time. Great.
Yeah,